Alright, so what I'm working on today is 2017 F-250 Super Duty with the 6.7, and it's got some air conditioning issues, so the customer took it to a well-known local dealer in Mountain Home, Idaho, and they says AC customer checking advice, AC customer states AC system concern, update, how, when, and what condition. Duplicated customer complaint, found AC to blow hot, ran self-test, found no codes, connected gauges and found static pressure at 450 psi. Pinpoint tested and found bias evap temp sensor allowing evap core to freeze, and low side would go into a vacuum and draw in air past seals. High pressure overworked the compressor and damaged it. Recommend replace evap core temp sensor, service as an evap core housing assembly, compressor and desiccant bag, and lines with mufflers. Customer declined all repairs. So they charged $135 to do this, to evaluate it. And then what they did is they said it's going to be $4,835 just to fix the AC system. Why is it so much? Because they're saying it needs all this stuff. They say it needs the evap core, housing, the compressor, desiccant bag, lines, muffler, all this stuff. It doesn't need all that. So what we did is we hooked up our manifold gauges. I hooked up the manifold gauges with, it's fixed now, but I hooked up the manifold gauges with everything off, and I had 450 psi on this high side, and this needle on the low side was touching. It went all the way around. So it was over service, because static pressure outside should be around, if it's 100 degrees out, low and high should be around 100 degrees when it's even, you know, pressures. So if it's 100 degrees out, it should be 100 when nothing's running. But when we were running it, the low side was like 90 or 100, the high side was like 350, 300, 400 something. We let some Freon out, and it went down to like 70. And the high side was still high, like 300. In other words, it was over-serviced. So the system was over-serviced, it had too much Freon in it. And who knows if it had air in it. So what we did is we pulled all the Freon out, pulled the vacuum on it, and put the right amount of Freon in, which is 1.69 pounds, which is 27 ounces is what we put into it. And now the pressures are within the specification according to the pressure chart. So now with the AC running on high, cycling, lows 25, highs 225 roughly within there. We got 27 ounces of Freon in, and you can look, sorry about the glare from the sun, you can look, we're at 46 degrees, ice cold. Looking at the scan tool, here's all of our data, cycling switch, pressure, all this stuff's good. Condenser commanded, or air conditioning compressor commanded's on. No faults, all this stuff. Ambient temperatures, all this. I don't need the fuel rail or engine friction. So all that stuff is good. So obviously there was an issue with the AC system, but it all boils down to the system was over serviced, right? Now we don't know the history on this. A while back a radiator was replaced at another shop in town. Maybe they took the AC condenser out. They didn't pull the vacuum, but obviously it was over-serviced. And that's why this vehicle worked and cooled when it was cooler out. When it's like 60, 65, 70 degrees, it was fine. But when it's 95, 100, it wouldn't cool. The compressor wasn't physically turning on. You couldn't see it turning on because there's a low and a high pressure switch. And if it's too low, it'll shut it off. If it's too high, like above 450 in this case, it'll obviously shut it off too. It was over-serviced. But the local dealer in Mountain Home was going to replace all this stuff when it didn't need any of that stuff. All right, so if you remember in here it says pinpoint testing the phone, bias evap temp sensor, evaporator temp sensor allowing evap core to freeze, and low side would go into a vacuum and draw in air past the seals. Well, look, we're within our specs. It says it's 33.8 degrees. The bias voltage ain't bad, it was 37. The compressor is going to cycle on and off with that temperature. We're above freezing. That's the evaporative core, which is this box down there. right? That's that box. Down there is that 34, 33, 34, 35, 37 degrees. Up here we're at like 43, 45 degrees. So that's all good. So I'm back to the scan tool again. It's at 35.6 degrees. So it went down a little bit and the compressor shut off, and then it shut it off so the temperature of the evap can go back up so it doesn't, you know, freeze it. But there's nothing wrong with this bias voltage that they're talking about at all. Nothing wrong with that. They're saying that there is in here from the local dealer in Mountain Home, but if it had a bad bias voltage, it would be at -40 or 190. It would be one way or the other if it's short to ground or open or whatever. It's reading correctly. So right now it's at 33.8. The compressor will shut off, and then it'll go back up in temperature so it doesn't freeze nothing. And it just went back up to 35.6, so we're good there. All right, so what I'm doing now is a self-test for the front controls interface module. That's where the evaporative sensor is located. I'll go ahead and do that real quick, which is going to pass. Sorry about the glare. So it's doing its self-test. So the PCM and the front control interface module is part of the AC system on this Ford truck. Come on. Yeah, no fault codes detected. So that's good. Let's look at our evaporator core temperature now. .8 degrees. So obviously it's because everything's off now. I got key and engine off. So everything is good. But reviewing everything, obviously the local dealer, it was just an over-serviced condition. They didn't troubleshoot it at all correctly. All right, one last thing. So it says on here, the bias evap temp sensor, which is reading correctly, allowing evap core to freeze, which it never did. And it says the low side would go into a vacuum and draw air in past the seals. That is complete bullshit, and I'll tell you why. When we first hooked this gauge up, the high side was all the way on around to 450. The low side was way down here. Why? Because the high side is so high, the low side was so high because it was overpressurized. So in other words, this needle was all the way around, stopped right here against this little brass pin. Well, the technician that worked on this, the local dealer in Mountain Home, probably glanced and said, oh, it's negative. It was never negative. It was overpressurized. The whole entire time, the problem with this truck is it was overpressurized. Again, this was 450 on the high. This was pegged around, so he looked at it and said, oh, it looks negative because it's below 0, which is over here, because it was actually all the way around. Obviously, he didn't see that. The problem is this truck has been over-serviced when they did the radiator last time, more likely, and that's what caused this issue. But the local dealer in Mountain Home wanted to replace all this stuff, and that didn't need any of that stuff. Would it have fixed it $5,000, or $4,800 to $5,000? Well, yeah, because they would have put new Freon in and get the right amount in, but none of the components are actually bad. So that is it for this 2017 Ford F-250 with the 6.7.